G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day. You've made it to Friday, so I hope you've had a fantastic week and that you're fresh and ready to roll into the weekend with whatever you have planned. Now, I know a lot of people are a little bit disappointed with what happened last night, well, the lack of happening, because I think a lot of people are sitting there refreshing their phones after we know that Dmitry Utkin and Yevgeny Prigozhin, of course, from Wagner PMC, were taken out. They expected something to happen. You know, we saw the mutiny now 2 months ago, and I think a lot of people are expecting some sort of rebuttal from there. Now, will we see that? Well, it's been only 24 hours, so definitely something like that could happen. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to have a look over Putin's speech about this, some more information that has come available about the plane crash, Ukrainian special operations team crossing into Crimea, and of course then a look at the maps at the end, as there's been a lot of big claims and some movements on the map. Now, primarily, Russian sources are claiming that there is now a major push happening in the Robotyne direction. Now, this is also being reported with Western equipment and saying that at least 83 pieces of armour are on the move, with some announcing the third phase of the Ukrainian counteroffensive has begun. And this came out from a FLIR camera from a drone showing this amount of then equipment moving. Now, does that confirm anything? No, it definitely does not. Could we see major movements? Maybe. I've seen it when I say primarily pro-Russian accounts. There has been other accounts announcing some large movements as well. It's been the last 48 hours very interesting for Crimea. So let's have a look at that and see what is then going on. So there's been an amphibious raid across to Crimea. So from the Ukrainian Ministry of Main Intelligence, they've said on the night of August 24th, an operation of the GUR of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine took place in support of the Navy in temporarily occupied Crimea. Special units on watercraft landed on the shore in the area of Onkivka and Malak settlements. During the execution of the task, the Ukrainian defenders engaged in combat with units of the occupier. As a result, the enemy suffered losses among personnel. Enemy equipment was destroyed. Also, the state flag flew again in the Ukrainian Crimea. Now, other channels are claiming that the Ukrainian soldiers here took out up to 30 Russian soldiers there. All goals and tasks have been completed at the end of the special operation. The Ukrainian defenders left the scene without casualties. That is very different to what a lot of Russian accounts and some official stuff is saying as well. The occupation administration of Crimea does not comment on the events despite the mass appeals of local residents. The only message refers to supposedly destruction of munitions on a set schedule. The Ukrainian Defence Forces will continue to assist the occupiers in destroying ammunition, equipment, and manpower. So, bit of tongue-in-cheek there at the end. What actually happened? Let's have a look at then some footage. And it has been very interesting last 24 hours for Crimea, like I've spoken about. So I have two videos here as well from the Intelligence Directorate. Skip through this. Now, nighttime GoPro footage, any footage like this, very dark, is going to be absolutely shit. So you just sort of have to go with what we have. Hear the weapon cock there. And then the Ukrainian flag being flown here.
Флагом рядом встань, Тома. Вы уже в Крыму. Героям слава. Пострел!
And then it skips to another scene, and then you can hear a number of shooting here from suppressed weapons. But realistically, you can't see anything. You just see a number of shooting, and then you can just see that they're on the move out because you can hear the boat, and then you can see the water splashing off the side of the boat. Now, the other video we have as well is of the flag. This one's cut up a little bit differently and different aspect ratio. And then we have some night vision footage from here of them, of course, with heavier weapon systems here on board the boats, and then, of course, then leaving Crimea. 50 cal there. So it's very, very interesting that crossing across, taking out people, and we don't know exactly how that went. You know, both sides have a very different story of how that actually went. So like with everything, there's a blurred line there too, and it's a special operation. But we do know wherever they have crossed from, that it's well over 100 kilometers to get there. So then Budanov has come out with this. So the head of the main director of intelligence at the GUR of the Ministry of Defense, Kyrylo Budanov, has stated the ability of the Ukrainian forces to reach any point of the occupied Crimea to defeat the enemy. Now, this comes after some strikes on an S-400 system in Crimea as well. We'll talk about this. We have the ability to strike any part of temporarily occupied ARC as of now. We can reach the enemy at absolutely any point. According to him, there are many different options for the deoccupation of Crimea, but it is impossible without military combat operations. Those who did stupid things better leave, and those who are waiting need to prepare and do everything to help. First of all, the intelligence agencies, well, and further when the troops will go into the open to support and create favourable conditions in order for it to happen simply faster and do it as bloodlessly as possible. And this is a photograph of an S-400 system we saw hit in occupied Crimea. Now we have this Olenivka here, so I don't have the exact geolocation of this, but you can see where it is from here. Further, let's see what the UA Intel says about this. The S-400 complex was destroyed and occupied Crimea. This is from the main Directorate of Intelligence of the Ministry of Defence. On August the 23rd, around 1000, an explosion occurred near the village of Olenivka on Cape This in the temporarily occupied Crimea, which destroyed the Russian S-400 Triumph long and medium-range anti-aircraft missile system. As a result of the explosion, the installation itself, the missiles installed on it, and the personnel were completely destroyed. Given the limited number of such complexes in the enemy's arsenal, this is a painful blow to their air defence system of the occupiers, which will have a serious impact on further events in the future. We have the SF crossing into Crimea, then of course this of the S-400 over only the past 24 hours. There has been footage floating around that the Russians are claiming that are Ukrainian soldiers that they killed on this crossing, but it's blurry footage. We can't really locate it. We don't know a time. It's not good enough to put anything at it, exactly like the other footage we have as well, where they're claiming to have killed a number of people and equipment there too. A lot of footage is probably out there, but can it be released? No. So a mission like this is insanely dangerous. And what are they doing? Well, they could potentially be scoping out landing zones for another force, as well as the political gain from doing this, or, special forces well in front of or behind the enemy line, and then taking out strategic targets. So we don't exactly know what was hit in there as well, but it is being used as really good propaganda for, maybe a future deoccupation of Crimea, and of course a big win, as Crimea has been struck by a lot of stuff at the moment. So as well, this has come through from the Russian MOD only in the past, say, hour. Tonight, an attempt by the Kyiv regime to carry out terrorist attacks by aircraft-type unmanned aerial vehicles on the territory of the Russian Federation was thwarted. Air defense systems detected 42 unmanned aerial vehicles as a result of the fire impact over the territory of the Republic of Crimea. 9 UAVs were destroyed, 33 were suppressed by EW and crashed without reaching the target. So Russia is claiming they downed all 42 drones that flew into Crimea tonight. So let's have a look over Yevgeny Prigozhin, some of the things that have been happening in the past 24 hours. As we know, his plane has gone down, killing him, killing Dmitry Utkin and some other members there, and of course the crew aboard the flight. Now, President Putin has then come out with this speech.
Это всегда трагедия. И действительно, если там находились, вроде первичные данные говорят о том, что там находились и сотрудники компании «Вагнер», хотел бы отметить, что это люди, которые внесли существенный вклад в
So, of course, referring to Ukraine as the Nazi regime, and that Wagner had a significant contribution to it, and that they'll remember that contribution. Of course, we know Putin and Prigozhin have known each other for a long time. There's photos going back with President Bush from the US, with Putin and Prigozhin as well in the background since the early 90s.
Это был человек сложной судьбы,
So here we go. He was a man of complicated destiny, and his mistakes were serious in his life.
Серьезная жизнь, и добивался он результатов, но
Got the result he needed for both himself and when I asked him to do so for
просил об этом для общего дела, как вот
the common cause being fighting for Russia, of course.
он был талантливый человек, талантливый бизнесмен, работал не только у нас в стране, и с результатом работал.
So it'll be interesting to see. He mentions here abroad, in Africa, and seeing how that will then go. We know Wagner has a lot of influence in Africa. Russia has a lot of influence in Africa, and how will Wagner's operations then actually continue there?
В Африке, в частности, занимался там нефтью, газом, драгоценными металлами и камнями. Вот он, а вчера только, насколько мне стало известно, вернулся из Африки. Встречался здесь с некоторыми официальными лицами. Но что точно совершенно, мне об этом докладывал сегодня с утра руководитель Следственного комитета. Они начали уже предварительное расследование этого происшествия.
So, of course, then talking about that there will be an investigation into what has happened and could be conducted in full and brought to a conclusion of what has happened there. That they'll continue the investigations about what has happened. And then President Zelensky has then had this to say.
Україна говорила і зверталась до країн світу щодо літаків. Ми не це мали на увазі. Не скажу вам відверто. Ми мали на увазі зовсім.
Talking about the F-16s.
Хотіли підтримку, хоча, напевно, це також в якомусь сенсі слова точно допоможуть. Що стосується
Then also stating we had nothing to do with it, this for sure. I'm sure everybody understands who is responsible for this situation. Pointing the finger back at the Kremlin. Now, do we know exactly who is responsible for this? No. Will we ever know with a smoking gun? No, we definitely won't. But there's been some very interesting bits and pieces about this as well. And we have seen a lot of memorials floating around. Now, interestingly, I've got a few photos here on the front of the Wagner headquarters. There we have a sledgehammer here. Wagner very infamously has used a sledgehammer against its own people and other people as a way of killing and torture before. Now, here we have, of course, they were known as the musicians with a violin out the front. Of course, Wagner being a musician from well back in the day. Now, the RVC have also called for Wagner soldiers as well, of course, being the pro-Ukrainian Russians in Ukraine, led by a very interesting bunch as well.
Для которых слова верность и честь еще имеют какой-то смысл. Судя по всему, вчера были цинично казнены ваш отец-основатель и командир. И вы прекрасно знаете, кто за этим стоит. Поэтому сейчас вы стоите перед серьезным выбором. Либо стать в стойло Министерства обороны Российской Федерации и служить цепными псами для палачей ваших командиров, или отомстить. Чтобы отомстить, вам нужно перейти на сторону Украины. Если вы не совершали военных преступлений, мы приглашаем вас в наши ряды. Давайте вместе закончим кровавую мясорубку СВО, а потом отправимся маршем на Москву. И в этот раз не будем останавливаться за 200 километров от МКАД, а дойдем до конца.
So, of course, then calling for unity from the Wagner soldiers who haven't committed war crimes to come over, join their ranks and march against the Kremlin, march against Moscow, because if your leaders were taken out cynically there, well, what is stopping them then taking out you? And we have seen in Belarus a number of Wagner camps, things like that, then packed up. And there would be guys who are feeling very betrayed at the moment who would then march towards Moscow just from the pure betrayal. Now, a friend of mine who is an aeronautical or aerospatial engineer, I'm sorry I'll get your title wrong, mate, but he actually had a look over this for me when he listened to my video, and he even laughed at my pronouncement of Embraer. And he went over some public records of incidents with these aircraft and has spoken about how rare it would actually be to have a full wing separation in just an accident, especially mid-flight. Takeoff and landing, that's when the wings are under the most stress, not mid-flight like it was. And the only other mid-flight crashes of these Embraer planes is primarily mid-air collision, so pilot or air traffic control error, but no known history of failures of these sorts or magnitude. The most common instance of Embraer is takeoff and landing, or landing gear issues, or then overrunning the runway. Now, he also had a look at the schematics of the specific plane and said, I imagine there could be something in the main landing gear wheel well right near the wing spars, run through the plane, basically tip to tip. He also added that wing separation is far more likely with a plane that has wing-mounted engines, just due to the external stress. Noting, though, that the Legacy 600, the plane Prigozhin was in that went down, the engines are mounted on the fuselage. In his opinion, greatly reducing the risk of any aviation fault like that with the separation of wing at least. He also agreed with my assessment that a heat-seeking air defense missile would target the engine, but also leave a lot of shrapnel, particularly in the vertical rear stabilizer. As you'd expect, a lot of puncture marks through that as well. And we know we've got this photograph here of then the rear stabilizer. He actually watches these, so thanks, Ben, for all the support and helping me out with this. Now, Sky News has reported that the US believes a plane crash intentionally caused by an explosion. There is a theory floating around that it was actually a delivery of wine onto the plane that was the bomb that blew up and took it down. Now, I've just had a quick look at the sort of this blueprint of the plane here. And of course, the wing spars are going to cross through the wings at the center of the plane. And I can't find much better than this, but I'm guessing there's some sort of storage around this sort of longer couch, and under here somewhere there's probably a galley back here as well. So could that bomb have been placed in wine that has gone into this area and then taken out a wing from there? So it's sort of unsure, but at the moment, at least the air defense, like it was being reported initially, seems less likely than a bomb on board. Also, a Mi-28 Russian helicopter surrendered to the Ukrainian forces. And let's see some photos and go over what the intel actually says about it. So this is Pravda, of course, Ukrainian news. A Mi-8 helicopter of the Russian forces ended up in Ukraine as a result of a long-term special operation of the main intelligence directorate of the armed forces of Ukraine. This happened as a result of a special operation of the main intelligence directorate, which lasted more than 6 months. Ukrainian intelligence lured a pilot of a Mi-8 AMTSH to Ukraine. The helicopter crew made a flight between two air bases and transported parts for the Su-27 and Su-30 fighter jets. Along with the pilot, on board were two crew members who did not know where the helicopter was actually flying. The Mi-8 landed in Kharkiv Oblast, of course, this being the chopper here. As a result of the special operations, two crew members were eliminated. The pilot remained in Ukraine and his family was taken there in advance. Now the pilot and his family are in Ukraine. The Mi-8 stayed in Ukraine along with the fighter jet parts. Sources say the helicopter is now in Kyiv. We have these photographs here of them getting onto this chopper, clearing it from here, these special operations soldiers there. And basically what has happened is they've managed to, somehow sweeten a deal of these pilots, get in touch, through whatever sources, and fly in and take out the two other crew members who were not knowing that they were actually going into Ukraine. Now, initially this was being reported that it was just a pure accident. The pilot got lost and landed on the wrong airfield, but now it's come out that it was actually a long-standing operation was running. Ukraine's future fighter jet fleet of F-16s is going to grow by 12, with Norway today announcing that they would pledge 12 fighter jets as well for the fleet, as well as $140 million for energy import of gas and electricity for Ukraine for the upcoming cold season. Now we have this as well about F-16s from the Kyiv Independent. The US will start training Ukrainians to fly and maintain F-16 fighter jets in October, following an English language course for pilots. Now, we know that there are two sets of pilots. There's ones that have been around for a while and ones that have been trained basically since the start of the war that will be getting, of course, a lot longer training package. The training will take place at Morris Air National Guard Base in Tucson, Arizona, facilitated by the Air Force National Guard's 162nd Wing. Although we do not have specific numbers to share at this time in regards to how many Ukrainians will participate in this training, we do anticipate it will include several pilots and dozens of mutineers. Now, of course, you know that every pilot, there are then a lot more people behind the scenes looking after that plane to get in the air. I often say to people, think of a Formula One. You have whoever in the seat and the whole crew then maintaining it. Very similar, even similar like performance levels of vehicle. The English language training is expected to begin in September with an aim to provide additional instructions given the complexity and specialized English that is required to fly this aircraft. So of course over the last week that has been the talk of the town, has been F-16s to Ukraine, but it is very, very early to speaking of what changes that will actually make on the front line. We have many, many months to go till we see these then in the air. Once they're in the air, then we can have that discussion of how they'll go. But at the moment, it is just pure speculation as well. Now, of course, was Ukraine Independence Day, and Charles Michael, who is the president of the European Council, has put up this video. And as well, NATO has put one up very similar to this.
Ukrainian friends, on this very important day your Independence Day. The EU stands with you. We will support you for as long as it takes. You are a member of our European...
So here saying we'll support you for as long as it takes, talking about taking back all their ground militarily, and you're a member of the European family.
And your future is with us. The
Got
stars
Zelensky
of
there.
the EU flag will fly over your free and sovereign nation. Slava Ukraini.
They're saying that the stars of the EU flag will fly over Ukraine at some point. But I feel like this might be a bit of a kick in the guts. Like, you're standing with us, you're supporting all this, because you're in the EU family. We're not letting you into the EU yet. That's how I would actually feel a bit about that as well. Now, let's have a look at the maps and see what is going on. And there's not too much, but here we have Ukraine, the capital of Kyiv, where everyone says there is this major offensive pushing is down south of Orikhiv to the south end of Robotyny. Now, some Ukrainian pages have claimed that this settlement down here, this town, this Novo, I'm not going to pronounce that, has been taken by the Ukrainian forces, but no maps are showing that yet. All they've shown is this further push to the west as well, and this map was updated about 5 or 6 hours ago. Let's then jump onto then this map as well, the daily Ukraine map update. Zoom in on this area, and this does show very similar, of course, showing that this town does come into some level of grey zone, but not at all that is under Ukrainian control there. But we see the same pushes on the west and then to the south. Now, we don't have a Suriak or a Rybar map update to then compare these across to, but we do have then the ISW maps as well, and ISW is doing something we never thought they'd do, highlighting different colours to show where areas are made and lost. Who would have thought? Anyway, here we have on the 22nd and the 23rd. This is where we saw Robotyny come under complete control and Ukraine make a lot of ground on the east and in the south. Now, this one being the 24th to 25th, taking some more ground in around Robotyny, as well as more ground on the west, which has been shown as well over then the Deep State and the daily Ukraine map update, but as well showing this Novo area hasn't become under control. And this map on the right is only an hour old, and this map is then 42 minutes old. Let's push further up into Bakhmut. Now, one interesting thing is we see, if we step back, we did hear about the other day that Russian forces did make some ground to the west of Yahidny from Burkivka. Now, we have seen Russia has made a fair bit of ground there, but it is stable down in this southern region. We did see Ukraine take a lot of ground. Now, this map isn't showing any change up around this area, but then the ISW in somewhere else I cannot pronounce, this is the same area. So what we just saw, the movement was Yahidny, Burkivka's here. So this is, of course, Bakhmut. This is the advance of the Russian forces, but up around here that Ukraine managed to take a amount of ground. So of course that is right here. That is this town that we can't pronounce sitting here. So cut down somewhere in there, but that is only being shown then across then the ISW map. Now, let's then have a look on the daily Ukraine map update, and we also know Uruzhany Staromorsky area doesn't show any change on any of the maps. Now, on the Ukraine daily map update, we're just going to look on this area, and no, it doesn't show any of the changes the other maps are showing. This daily map update doesn't show anywhere else changing. The only other change we actually have is a small shift here just to the west of Svatov, that we have Ukraine making a bit of ground here to the north of Novohorovka here, where we have seen that Russia did make an amount of ground in this area over the past maybe 2 weeks, but it has been fairly contested since. And, you know, the ISW's assessment and a lot of other people's assessment is Russia is pushing very hard up in the north, even Kupiansk, Svatov region, whilst Ukraine pushed in the south to try and draw some reserves away. Now, what is being spoken about with Robotyny is how much did it actually take, 60, 70 days to take into this area. How many people actually got grinded down in that to then reach the further lines of defense. So they're into the first line of defense, but there are multiple other lines down here to get into Tokmak. And, you know, as we have the end of September starts getting very wet, whatever in Ukraine, there are a lot of doubts around where this will get to before then it has to dig in. And I think a lot of people are seeing that Russia has a month more of defending until it sort of really settles down for a couple of months. That may not be the case with a lot of these vehicles. It can continue the fight. So there's definitely not only a few weeks left of the offensive. Potentially there could be more. You know, we're seeing more attacks on Crimea. We're seeing forces land at Crimea. So very interesting, and it'll be interesting to see what then Wagner PMC do over the next week once all the commanders meet and what is actually said to happen there. So that will all be interesting. Legends, this one was hard to get through. I don't know why, I just could not speak for the life of me. Anyway, thank you very much. If you'd like to support me, the link's down below, but never feel obliged. If you'd like to join the Telegram, there's a link somewhere too. Okay, thank you very much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.